Now that we're here, we're 104 on a Thursday afternoon, election week to talk about imagination. Thank you all for joining us. I'm glad to have you. We really appreciate you spending time with us. Um, and I know that there's a lot going on, and there's a lot to discuss and unpack, and we're bringing all sorts of emotions and experiences and thoughts and ideas into this time together. So I'm very much excited to talk about imagination. This is the last and final episode of the OmniPotential series. For those of you who have not seen any of the previous four episodes, my name is Joel. I am one of the co-founders and executive director of the Holon Institute. We are a education and advisory organization, and we exist to co-create the social, the cultural, and the ecological conditions necessary to actualize the omnipotential of human creativity. We really believe that we are not just uh, in an era of change, but fundamentally a change of eras. And so, um, this omnipotential series is our first foray into unpacking some of the themes that animate us as an organization and the work that we're doing. And today we get to talk about imagination, which is the culmination of this series. To Allison's question, yes, they will be. All of these have been recorded. They will be published next week. So we have been busy editing and getting these ready for sharing. We'll also be releasing those via email first, with a resource list for each episode. So a lot of the things that we've mentioned, the ideas, the concepts, the books, the podcasts, etc., will all be included in an email coming out next week with links to the videos. So if you'd like to get that, make sure that you're signed up for our email list. We don't really have a website yet, but the holoninstitute.org, you can put your email in there, and you'll be sure to get the links to all the videos. Um, all right. So with that, I think welcome to imagination. And I just want to acknowledge that it is election week, that there's a lot going on in the world right now, and that the super organism of our planet is um, really going through it. And um, I know that there's a lot of big emotions. There's a lot of uh, real practical fear, and that is all welcome. And and so I wanted to acknowledge that just because sometimes in moments that feel heavy like this, where it's very easy to justify cynicism and fear and concern, all of those things are real and very much should be embraced. Uh, Talking about imagination can feel flippant. It can feel like, well, we just need to be here in the now. We need to actually process the grief. We need to think through what's next. We need to really start activating networks of resistance. We need to do the things that we need to do to get to protect ourselves and our loved ones, because there is, in many cases, very real threats um, to our livelihood and our even our mm, physical well being. So I wanted to acknowledge that there is a shadow to imagination, right? That there's stories that are widely embraced, that are in many cases fantasies or perceptions of reality that are not actually empirically observable. And that can take the form of a shadow, where it's actually destructive narratives, right? It's the power and the mechanisms of imagination being leveraged for division and for destruction rather than for unity and for emergence and life force and flourishing and prosperity. So, um, we are not coming into this conversation ignorant of the fact that there is a lot of nuance here when we're talking about imagination, and then when we're talking about story, and we're talking about narrative, and we're talking about beliefs, and we're talking about the creation of an alternative reality or our ability to visualize or dream of a world that looks different than it does today. It's a complex thing. And your all of the nuance and all of the complexity of that is welcome in this conversation. So hopefully we'll be able to create a bit of space today that allows for some solace and respite from craziness of the world, and we can walk away feeling inspired and full and ready to just keep moving and keep doing the work that we're doing. So, with that, very excited to introduce Chris. Chris Everett is somebody that we met, what was it, a year and a half ago now, Chris? Was that how long?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, I think I keep thinking it's been way longer than that, but I think it's only been a year and a half. It feels like I've known you for 5 years, but uh, Chris and I met at an event, a conference in Portugal, and I happened to just sit down at the table that he was sitting eating a meal, and we struck up a conversation, and then serendipitously we encountered each other a few other times throughout the course of that event, and um, I just knew from the second that Chris began speaking that there was a beauty and a warmth and a depth to Chris's entire being and way of walking through the world that I knew I wanted to be in relationship with. So Chris has become a mentor and friend to me, and I'm just so immensely grateful for that relationship, Chris. Thank you for everything, and very excited to have this conversation today. So, for those of you who don't know Chris, Chris has a very illustrious career as an experienced designer, working in brand, partnering with visionary leaders to transform during times of change. He's a musician, an artist, and just an all around beautiful curator of ideas, people, relationships, objects, and is the minister of beauty. And I hope that we get a chance to unpack what that means. That over the course of 3 decades of Chris's career, that becoming this minister of beauty is a really a wonderful part of his story and the work that he does in the world, which includes uh, over the last decade, running a nonprofit arts organization on his farm called Everwood Homestead with his husband, Bill. It's a beautiful thing and work that they're doing there. He's been a student of ancient earth wisdoms and is formally our first founding board member of the Holon Institute. So, Chris, thank you so much for being here. We're really excited for this conversation.
Thank you. I feel really honored to be a part of this conversation and to close out the series too.
So let's jump in. And there's a lot of ways to walk through this door to get to the conversation of imagination. And so, kind of want to just hand it over to you, Chris, and allow you to invite us into imagination and the form that you feel best.
Mm, Thank you for that. I'd love for everybody just to take a moment and a deep breath and feel into your body in this moment. This is a reality, whatever your body is holding. Um, I'm so grateful for the last conversation we had with Dr. Hilary McBride to remind us to listen to what our body is saying in this moment. And do we feel grief? Do we feel rage? Do we feel joy? Do we feel possibility? Do we feel openness, closed down? Whatever it is exactly right. And with the acknowledgement of that, there is another world that we live in too, which is our imagination, our inner world, the space that nobody else gets to see or know. Um, it occurred to me in the last couple of weeks as I was thinking about this. My husband and I have been together 20 years, and you know someone deeply, but we have no idea what this inner life really is like for each of us. How much do we really know each other over the course of a lifetime or even in the short term? We get to acknowledge the moment that we are all in, traveling in the world, but also traveling in our imagination. And what opens us up, what closes down the imagination, news, social media, they, they manipulate the imagination of the possible. There's a finite story that is being told. And there is a way that we get halted if that is the only space that we occupy. And knowing from our ethos about emergent possibility through embodied imagination, Tina talked with us about the through. The only way is through. So how do we navigate through? In simplest terms, imagination is the ability of the mind to create images, sensations, scenarios beyond the physical experience. For us, it is the place of creativity, artistry, problem solving, empathy, understanding, grief, healing, fantasy, and play. And as Joel mentioned before, there are shadow aspects to it as well. In this sandbox, the toys that we get to play with in imagination is power, our narratives, story, context, survival, flourishing. There is a remarkable woman out of San Francisco named Larissa Conte, and she's been studying power and power dynamics. I highly recommend that you look her up. But she talks about the two sides of power, power that serves the whole and shadow power. Power in its nature is actually benign. She defines it as power is the ability to move energy through a system. Imagination is a particular energy that we are moving into the world and moving ourselves through. And it can have both of those aspects to it. Imagination that can serve the whole and shadow imagination as well. We get to choose. One of the things that I will talk a lot here is about agency. This is all a reminder that we have creative agency over the way that we perceive the world, dream into the world, and move in the world. As we know, imagination is also connected with past and future. It is alive in us from everything from what am I going to have for dinner tonight to what is the future of our civilization. I referenced this earlier. What we're talking about is our inner life, each one of us. We carry this world with us all the time. And it shifts our perspective, our perceiving of the world and our place in it and how we want to move in it. Another way to think about it is connecting it to the energies of being and becoming. You may have heard this. And being is that vertical place, the place of imagination, dreaming, create values, wisdom, spirituality. And becoming is the way that we move in the world, that we activate ourselves in the world. Becoming is what we do. Being actually is who we are. That world that we live in that being place is who we are. And our who informs all of our doing. That is the relationship between the two. And as we're starting to wonder, how do we bridge separation? How do we mend separation? Our question where we usually start is, well, what do you do? And actually the question is, what is it like to be you? The bigger question is, what is your life like? It is so much more expansive than just the doing. It is the being, is where we know both ourselves and each other. I guess the last thing that I'll just point out here, there's so much of where we can go with imagination. But in this current context, regardless of our orientation to it, imagination challenges us to look beyond the current context and see different possibilities. What are the possibilities for how we might move in it, how we might respond to it? There's a difference between responding and reacting. And removing judgment for both of these things And knowing that our body is going to have a reaction, fear, anger, all of that, that is a pure, real, let's say, loving reaction. But we have the ability to respond and not just to move out of pure reaction. There is a saying in the earth wisdom tradition that in the beginning, people had questions and they were free. Then they had answers and became enslaved. This is an invitation to stay in the question place, and where the news and the social media and all of this starts getting us stuck is this is the answer. This is the answer. This is the only way. And we get stuck. We become enslaved by whatever narrative is being said. And it begs us to stay in the question place, which is where the possibility lives. I'll leave it there for now.
It's, I mean, I think that the being and becoming stuff rings true for me because, yeah, I'm going to attempt to connect a couple dots here as a preface to my next question, which is this idea that in our being, this interior world that you've described, this interior world has many components, many facets, right? It's fractal in nature. It's highly diverse because it's constituted by the diversity of experiences that we've had through life, our immediate environmental context, the way that we were parented, our attachment style, whether or not we had good teachers in school, what kind of, where our intersectionality introduced opportunity and privilege or not, right? There's all sorts of dimensions that we could explore there when kind of unpacking the self in terms of the being. Was your mom a lab scientist and hardcore evolutionist, or was your dad a evangelical Christian pastor, right? Those things have really big influences on our self-perception and the personhood that we cultivate and carry into adulthood and then throughout life. And so there's something about our imagination, right? That interior world that we live in, which is often uh, an outcome of the ways that we're interpreting our experience. And so if you think about imagination as a meaning-making mechanism, the ability to ascribe meaning to experience,
Yeah.
imagination is the equals sign in the equation. This happened and this happened, so therefore it must equal this, right? Um, and so the ways in which we're shaped by our environment and the ways that we perceive ourselves and the ways in which our personhood is formed are often tied to our imagination in regard to what we believe is reality or what could be reality. And so there's a connection there that I think is very interesting, both because it explains where our biases and other, challenges come from in that regard, but also where we might be able to identify with people who share different life experience with us and say, but what could be in this regard, right? Um, and so what that leads me to in this question is, uh, if imagination is often conditioned, I guess. How do we become more aware of our conditioning and liberate our imagination from the constraints of what our environment might say is feasible or what our immediate environment might say is possible? What are maybe what's the first step in that, becoming aware and becoming to step into a fuller, more robust imagination that transcends our own being and becoming?
Yeah. It's such a great question. And I think it is the question. Um, when there's another concept in the medicine teachings about the observer self, that when we are in the world, when we are in the chaos, that we have the ability to kind of rise up like a drone and say, all right, what's really going on here? And make some assessments about what story is happening, what is unpacking what role am I playing in the unpacking of what is going on. And see yourself with that perspective as well. It reminds me, I think it was Eckhart Tolle that talked about, I am not the voices in my head. I'm the one listening to the voices in my head. And that bit of separation really helps you not be fully defined by those stories, but to really examine them and say, is this true? Am I a victim of this? Do I want to rewrite this? I think that critical judgment of, is this really true? Um, that is a way to release some of that energy, but also appreciation can do it as well. That this has been my journey.
Mm.
And these are the things I have gone through. And this is the way that I was raised. And these were some really hard times. And can I hold those with appreciation? That they were gifts to teach me, that they were ways to encourage me to grow and to go deeper. Or am I a victim of them? Because we can't completely define ourselves by these things. And even the power of the statement, I am.
Mm.
I want to caution, when you are conjuring the I am statement, you are pulling something into you. I am broken. I am a victim. I am sick. And some of this may be true, but is there an I am that could be different that you want to pull forward in a way to shift that energy in yourself so that you are not um, taken down by it, but you were able to step into the observer self and get back in the driver's seat.
Yeah. There's a lot around that object subject uh, relationship is really liberating. I think that this idea, I am, I am the one listening, um, is a really fantastic first step in kind of stepping into that awareness. I think identifying your thoughts and the patterns of your thoughts and how those thoughts become spells in your life, and in as much as they are almost predeterminate self-fulfilling prophecies, right?
Yes.
Uh, that those narratives and stories become the construct by which then we make decisions, right? Um, this is why that we at the Holland Institute say that all systems are predicated on stories. And that if you want to change the system, you have to change the story. And that's why fundamentally we have to talk about imagination. Um, and so maybe could you speak to some of the systemic inhibitors of imagination right now? Like, what's the state of imagination today? Why is it so critical to be leaning into imagination, especially in this week? Mm. And maybe some of what are the other things that we should just be looking at and be aware of, so we know to identify them as inhibitors to imagination.
Mhm. Um, I appreciate the question. To your previous point, I think one of the most valuable exercises that we can do in journaling is to examine, what stories am I telling?
Mm.
What are the 5 stories that I am building my life around, that I keep telling myself are true, and that are the things that are defining how I am showing up and how I see? Because that is going to tell you a lot about yourself and how you are going to react versus respond. Again, pull your agency back and get really clear about, how am I defining myself, and what do I want to shift? Um, there was a really remarkable movie that we just saw at the Minneapolis Film Festival a couple of weeks ago, called Bow, Artist at War. And it was about Joseph and Rebecca Bow. You may have seen reference to them in Schindler's List. They were the couple that got married in the concentration camp. And this movie is all about their story and their marriage. And it turns out he was a really remarkable illustrator and caricature artist. And even in those circumstances, he he knew his job was to translate what was going on and to find humor in it, to lighten everybody, to help people find some hope through his artwork. And that's what drove him through. They managed both to survive. But I mean, that is the extreme moment of, do I give up hope? And when do you give up hope? When you give up agency, when you give up your ability to shift your narrative and make choice about where I'm going to be is, I do believe that there's life spirit in our life force in imagination. And when we lose touch with that, we do lose touch with our life force. So keep it engaged. How am I going to show up in this moment? There is um, a statement that was written by the poet and priest John O'Donohue that has been really helpful for me. That when our eyes are graced with wonder, the world reveals its wonder. There are people who see only dullness in the world, and that is because their eyes have already dulled. So much depends on how we look at things. The quality of our looking determines what we come to see. Too often we squander the invitations extended to us because our looking has become repetitive and blind. The mystery and the beauty is all around us, but we never manage to see it. I'm so moved by this idea that the quality of our looking determines what we see. And that's not to say that there isn't real danger in the world, but we have agency to see beauty or see nothing but disaster. It's so interesting on social media in this last 24 hours, those who are posting poems to help us reorient. I mean, we're on the human journey. We have been here before, and we will be here again. I just had this conversation with my mom last night, who was in a real moment of panic, which is real. And she was talking about the roller coaster, and I'm just exhausted by the roller coaster. And we've never been on this roller coaster. I said, Mom, remember the 60s in Vietnam and MLK and JFK? We have been through the roller coaster before. So this is the human experience. How are we going to move through it? And can we have eyes that are looking for beauty? Because if we do, we will see it.
Mm. Yeah, and I want to come back to that. I think maybe towards the end we can talk about some practices for imagination and how maybe there's ways that we can begin practicing the recognition of beauty. Um, and I think you're spot on in this moment of connecting beauty to possibility and imagination because I think that um just gonna mute folks there. I think that there's a very important thing to highlight here. um, I'm trying to formulate the thought. I guess I'll start by just saying that I really resonate with the comfort of beauty in as much as it reminds me of what's possible beyond just the maybe the panic I feel in the moment. I had this moment yesterday. I very much was looking to nature for comfort yesterday. And just remember at one point kind of just sitting in the sun and just like recognizing the warmth and just being like, wow, like this is, I'm connecting with a star right now and just feeling like that's so much more. It's such a better thing to think about, right? Having this relationship with this star, like a physical relationship, because I can literally feel its heat, uh, than thinking about all the other stuff. And there was another moment in the clouds were really thin, and so it looked like, frosted glass that was being backlit, and it just
Mm.
had this beautiful glow, and then in the evening, the moon came out. It was this beautiful, you know, that moment in where the sky's not dark yet, it's still kind of a light blue or a medium navy blue, but you can still see the hue of the sunset, and then the moon is right there, and it was
Yeah.
just this glowing crescent moon, and, it kept reminding me throughout the day that how long those things have been there, right? The billions of years that these objects, the star, the moon, and Earth have been around. Um, and it helped me to dissolve a little bit some of the calcification of the panic, that I was feeling and just the terror. So anyways, I think when we can start recognizing beauty, to your point, it does help us expand and connect in a way that cracks the door back open to possibility, and we don't need to just suffocate living in, what's going to be, and we can find hope in what could be.
Mm,
Uh, the way that I've been sharing this with my kids is it's been mm, kind of a slogan for us is to live enchanted
mm, love
and to
that.
just always be looking for it, right? And to recognize it. One of the themes that's come up a lot in the series is stillness. And stillness and reflection is um, very antithetical to the world that we live. Right? We live in this world that's very much oriented around productivity and efficiency and optimization, but it's also really oriented around things like quantification, right? The ability to measure, the ability to quantify, and we call this basically we just call it data, right? We live in this data driven world. Uh, can you speak a little bit to the relationship between the context that most of us live in, whether it's organizationally or just culturally, with this high highly indexed orientation towards empiricism and metricization and measurement and and imagination in the unmeasurable? Could you speak to that a little?
Wow, what a great question. Um, yes, we are. I think so much of our um, drive to understand numbers and to measure. This is in the doing place. Um, this comes out of our curiosity and our wonder for the world. How does it work, and how does it connect with everything else? And that is everything else too. Uh, that is the being and the becoming, the being and the doing. And what I'm really my study around beauty has been one about connection. And I've had a research question for many years that has been how have you experienced beauty today? And it doesn't matter if you're 7 years old or if you're 70 years old, everybody has an answer. And and the interesting thing is, I don't know that anybody has a singular definition of what beauty is, but we all know it when we experience it. And you were just speaking about it a moment ago. 95% of the time, what comes back are stories of connection. I had a profound conversation with a friend. My daughter looked up at me and smiled this morning. Even in nature, as you were speaking about, there is awe and wonder, but you are feeling connected to nature and the ways that you are nature. We are all stardust at the end of the day. But I love how scientists talk about this as well, um, and researchers, the beauty of math, the beauty of data, the beauty of what is underneath of what makes things happen. I got to spend some time at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute in Panama for several years, working with some of the world's leading nature researchers. And they could not pull apart just raw data and study, and just complete wonder and awe for what it was that they were experiencing. And there was so much more that um, to discover and to keep digging into. And so, in that way, even with data and the rest of it, if we can see the beauty in that, and a beauty in the connectedness of what it is we're doing in the bigger world that we're a part of, we can have eyes for wonder, awe, and beauty in that too.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I mean, one of the things that, uh, well, before I go to that, actually, I want maybe can you expand a little bit more on? We'll come back to this idea of quantification and imagination, but I think what you were just speaking to is this relationship between recognizing beauty and imagination, and specifically beauty in um, the ways in which we come to understand or come to know the world around us, whether it's feeling connected to nature through embodied experience or through scientific research. Um, did we lose somewhere along the way in our Western culture the ability to see beauty and wonder and awe and possibility? And what what um what can we do if so, is there something that we should be doing or how maybe just I just love to hear you riff more on just that connection between, beauty, possibility, and imagination, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think that we've lost touch with it. We can't because
Yep.
we're human beings. Um, I think that we have, hmm, part of Holland's theses is we are suffering separation.
Mm, mhm,
And and without hyperbole, we can look at what is going on in the world and the impact and can maybe say that this is a result of separation. And there's several layers for that. The first is separation from self.
mm,
And and reconnecting with imagination is the invitation to reconnect with self. What stories am I living based on? What worldview am I taking? Am I looking for beauty? What do I care about? Am I a victim, or can I recognize all of the beauty and the grace of the hard parts and the beautiful parts and reconnect to the whole of yourself, the spiritual side of yourself, the wonder of the universe that lives inside of yourself? So separation number one is to self. Separation number two, which is profound in this moment, is with each other. We are living in a global pandemic of loneliness. And what is the impact of that? Othering, fear, war, power, the impact of the ways that we have lost our connection to each other's is profound, and all the ways that we are witnessing it and all the ways that the systems are being built to continue to promote that. Because if we are separated from each other and ourselves, we are then just at the mercy of whatever ocean wave is going to hit us. But there's also a profound separation from nature. We have commoditized it. And we have forgotten that we are nature. Mother Earth is us. And what we do to the earth, we do to ourselves. It is all connected. And I would also posit, and we can all use whatever language we want, we have lost connection to the mystery. Spirituality, whatever that is for you, we've lost connection with our ancestors and legacy, ancestors backwards and forwards. And so if you look at all of that separation, we can see the impact of it. But what has been remarkable in the work that I've been doing personally, but also the work we've been doing at the Arts Foundation, is it doesn't take a lot for people to remember.
mm,
When they sit in a beautiful place of beauty, a place where they can see all of the hand touched items that this is for you, this is for you, it feels like a gift. When we are met with radical hospitality, it feels like a gift and an opening. When we take a walk on the trails and we hear goats off in the distance, there's an opening in your heart. And when we sit down together and have a deep, profound conversation where I get to know the who of you, not just what you do, we remember beauty. We remember it. We remember it. We remember it. And we're so hungry, I think, the more that we have of it. John O'Donoghue kind of cracked this open for me. He wrote, like for me, the book, and it's called Beauty. Please go out and get it. We'll put it in the resources. Um, but he talked about it. He said, when we experience profound beauty, it feels like a homecoming. And so for me, it feels like we have just wandered a little ways from home. But when we experience it, when we are reminded, when we are surrounded by it, it is something that is so familiar to us. It feels like we're coming back home.
Mm, mhm. Yeah, I love that so much, that idea of homecoming. Um, because to your first point about separation from self, I mean, there's a reintegration. I love lately you've been saying remembering as, taking members and remembering them together, right? That um there's so much there. I think, I'm beginning to see this kind of like armature of the conversation that we've been having unfold, and it's very interesting to see this idea of the self, um and that there's more to the self than maybe we recognize or realize, and that there's a homecoming, and the homecoming is to integrate and incorporate parts of ourselves that maybe we've left behind or that have been exiled for one reason or another, right? Maybe because they're not socially acceptable. Maybe we've had to mask to be loved. Maybe um, our organizational environments aren't conducive to it. For example, when I'm thinking about data for this say I'm thinking about the corporate environment or a bureaucratic governmental environment, right? The ways that we make decisions about where we're going to channel resources and energy and time, it's often uh, that decision making process is often over indexed on feasibility and measurability, right? And so what happens is our intuition, that emotional knowing, it gets left behind. And so a part of ourselves is not a part of that decision making process. And that makes it harder to see possibility when our emotional self, that intuitive knowing, is not integrated into the greater whole. Our ability to recognize awe, wonder, enchantment, possibility becomes atrophied. And I think that's part of this, like, well, that's why we need this homecoming. That's why we need to render the reintegration of self. We need to remember, we need to extend hospitality to even the uncomfortable emotions that we have. Because even in the uncomfortable emotions, we're practicing we're an emotional capacity to experience something.
Even in the underserved communities, when we're thinking about, we highlight the food desert.
Mm,
We never highlight the beauty desert.
mhm.
What does that do to the soul
Right.
in the places where there's not a park? There's not a place for people to meet and connect with each other, where there's not a place to play. That is just as essential as the food.
Right. Yeah. So, by the way, for folks listening, if you have questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat. Um, Chris, you mentioned this earlier. We're talking about maybe practices, and I'm wondering if there's a few just practical things that you could leave us with here in the next 5 to 7 minutes or so around um, how do we engage our imagination? I mean, we talked a lot about recognizing and becoming more aware of ourselves, of our experiences, of our stories, of our conditioning, of our biases, of reintegration, remembering, extending hospitality, um, mending separation. There's a lot here, and a lot of it can get a bit heady and big ideas. How do we tether this to like the thing that we want to now go practice, um, to begin cultivating capacity for this?
Thank you. Um, I'll start with beauty. We knowing how closely tied beauty is to coming back home to self. ask yourself the same question. How have you experienced beauty today? How can you experience beauty today? How can you experience moments of deep connection? And some of that, you used the word stillness, I would say presence,
Mm.
like radical presence to the moments that you're in. And right now, how am I experiencing beauty? How can I look for beauty around? I am a big believer in journaling, and I think to make it more potent, it is an invitation to look at stories. What stories are you carrying with you? What stories are you constantly telling yourself? Both in your daydreams, in your wonderings as you move through the world, but also at nighttime. What stories are carrying you that you may not have control over? Um, I love Elizabeth Gilbert talks about talking to her imagination. As she writes books and ideas come to her, she says, I make them pitch me, tell me why I should spend my time and attention on you.
Yeah.
Why are you worthy? Are you ready? Are you complete yet? Or do you want to come back in a year or two?
Mm.
That's why I love that exchange too. As you know, in some of my work, I really believe in connecting with ancestors and asking, pull inside and invite your ancestors in from the past and the future and say, what do you have to offer me? What advice do you want to give? What values should I care for? Um, Another one is play. We were all toddlers once, right? And so this was in us as little kids from the very beginning, that we lived in a world of imagination. And one of the things that I love about play is, you're in that play space where you measure time and depth rather than length, that you look up and it's like, oh my God, an entire afternoon has just disappeared. You have shifted energy into a different place and engaged your imagination. I do it by playing piano myself, playing with others. Um, and then I guess um, experiencing art, of course. But finally, I am really thinking a lot about these days engaging imagination with others, that we gather together around a topic or an idea or a wish, um, and imagine together, and then share those imagining with each other. What did you see? What did you see? What do you hope for? Let's go bigger. Let's go deeper and build a collective imagining, and see what might come from that.
Yeah, I love that. Something else you mentioned recently was this idea of, you know, picture it, like begin to get into the details of the vision of the thing itself. So, if you can imagine yourself rocking it, you can begin to see like, oh, that's what that could look like. Therefore, these are the things that need to be true for that reality to become a reality. Um, yeah, there's a lot there that we can begin doing. I think the other thing that you mentioned that I really appreciated was um, how play is so fundamental to this all. Um, and I think play often is misconstrued as like, well, you gotta get toys out or you gotta do, whatever. And one of the things I've been thinking a lot about lately is play as active rest.
Mm,
Professional athletes are just as invested in recovery as they are in their actual performance, right? And and play doesn't need to be something that's um, I got to get the puzzle out, or I have to have toys, or I got to be, whatever. It could be as simple as just going for a 10-minute walk. Um, there was a study out of Stanford a couple years ago that found that um, compared to a control group, a group of people who spent 10 minutes walking once a day were 60% more creative. And it's just because it's a way to actively rest from presence, like at the task that you're doing, and to allow your mind to begin making connections through an embodied activity. That kind of playful active rest, it sparks and triggers new connections. This is why 90% of people report having ideas in the shower, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I think that kind of that mentality of playing and getting out and being physical and um, doing things that are restorative, right, in a physical, active way is a huge piece of this. Uh, any uh, do you want to do a little collective imagining together right now, Chris?
I would love that. Would everybody be up for it? If we took
Yeah,
like 5 minutes and tried something?
let's do it.
All right. Um, I'm going to invite you to turn off your camera and settle yourself in your chair, feet on the ground, feel the earth holding and supporting you. You are well supported. And with your eyes closed and a deep breath, I'm going to invite us to a sacred place with a fire. It is night. It is still. Thumbnail of a moon watching over us. We are standing shoulder to shoulder, all of us in this group around the fire. Feel the warmth on your skin. Smell the smoke, the loamy earth, the char and spark. Standing behind each of us are our ancestors 100 years in the future, several generations in front of us. They place their hands on your shoulders. You are supported by those who will come after you. They are aware of this moment. They are aware of everything that happens after. And they're here supporting you. One of your ancestors, a child of the next generation, whispers something in your ear that they want you to know right now. Listen for that message. Offer gratitude in your way for all of the ancestors that support us backwards and forwards, our collective global family. And with a few deep breaths, come back into the room. When you're ready, you can turn on the camera. We join ourselves in this room. And if you would like, I am curious. If you received a message, toss it in the chat so that it can encourage all of us in these days. Thank you. I know we're getting to time. Joel, would you like to close us as folks continue dropping their gems in the wisdom pool?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you all for joining us today and for participating and um uh as I mentioned up front, this is the last episode of our OmniPotential series. We have now spent 5 weeks unpacking emergent possibility through embodied imagination. And I really love just all the insights that we've encountered along this journey, um, that something is emerging, and we are being invited to participate in that emergence. That possibility is unfolding, uh, and the ways in which we can participate with the emergent possibility, with the unfolding of what could be, is to go through. It's to be in. It's to integrate. It's to uh, embrace the both the good and the bad, and and then to be embodied, to just to be a body and to be connected to our bodies, to be connected to the greater body, and to the superorganism, um, and then to imagine, right, from the place of grief and hope and gratitude and pain. Often it's from all of that, right? To imagine a different way of living, a different way of being, and new possibility. And in doing that, we can participate with the unfolding. So it's not to over define what should be, but it's to collaborate with the unfolding of what could be. And that's what emergent possibility through embodied imagination is all about. And that's what we are very excited to be doing more of in the coming year. As I mentioned, we'll be rolling out and announcing a series of in-person events, which we're very excited about, as well as an online event series in the next year, early 2025. So be on the lookout for that. We'll be releasing this video series as well in the next week. Sign up on our email for our email list for that. And in the meantime, um, we're here for you. Just anything that we can do to support you and your work in the world, please don't hesitate to reach out. And otherwise, we'll see you all later. So thanks for joining us today. Have a great afternoon, y'all.
Thank you, everyone.